people join us. Hello, Commissioner Webb. And then we also have Chris Farrar with us and Laura Runyon. And so my name is, excuse me, my name is Monica Steele. I'm the Assistant County Manager with Clatsop County. And so I want to thank everybody who has taken the time to join us today for our kickoff meeting. And just to kind of reiterate that this is the first of several meetings that we will be having. This process is I believe it's a 4-year process. And so you will be hearing a lot from us over the next few years. And before we get into all of the details about Brownfield grants and kind of learning a little bit more about everything, I just wanted to kind of touch on what the process was to get us to where we are now. And I have with me today, and they'll introduce themselves a little bit more shortly, but Sarah Lou Heath with Colpack and Carrie Racky with Stantec. And so back in the late summer of 2021, there were several members from the community, the cities, myself with the county, Kevin Leahy with Cedar, and Colpack was also present, as well as a consulting firm who helped us go through the grant application process to apply for these funds. And during that time, there were several of us, and we just kind of were sitting around in the room trying to figure out for the grant application sites that would be potential sites for the application, because through the grant process, we're obligated to demonstrate the need throughout the county. And so the properties that were identified and that some people have seen on the list were properties that we just kind of put out there for illustrative purposes, because again, there's a requirement in the grant application process to show a need. So these were just properties that the group of people said, well, you know, I know that at one point in time that was a gas station, or that was a laundromat, or that was a naval base. And so identifying them that way, and then also looking at the potential uses for them, knowing that Clatsop County has a need for housing and a need for economic development opportunities. And so those sites were identified in the application, just again for illustrative purposes. And then we submitted that grant application at the end of the calendar year in 2021. We then learned in May of 2022 that we were awarded this $500,000 grant. So then we began the process of going out for requests for proposals to hire a qualified environmental professional to help us with this, because we are not brownfield experts, and there are a lot of legalities and technical issues that we need to have somebody who is an expert in this field helping us with. And then we also have an agreement with Colpack to help us with some of this technical applications, creating the work plan and everything that is required by the EPA. And so that's how this came to be. That's how the county was awarded these funds. And it was a collaborative effort, like I mentioned, with the cities and Cedar and Colpack. And so now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sarah Lou Heath of Colpack to introduce herself and kind of talk about what she's helping out with.
Thank you, Monica. Thanks everybody for making it tonight. I hope you are warm and cozy. I am Sarah Lou. My last name is Heath. I'm the Deputy Director, the Columbia Pacific Economic Development District. So we serve not only Clatsop County, but Columbia, Tillamook, and Western Washington County too. So this effort, as Monica mentioned, started several years ago. There was also an award for Tillamook County to do similar assessment work. And there was also an award to Colpack to start a revolving loan fund, because what we're going to talk about tonight is assessment assistance, and what the next steps should be, we hope to be, after assessment would be cleanup. And so these programs are meant to work together. And I'm just really happy to be here tonight. I'm excited to be helping Clatsop County with this project. And I will be more than likely one of the people that you talk to a lot during this process if you end up being a candidate and want to participate. So, thanks again. I am now going to turn it over to Carrie Racky with Stantec, who is that qualified environmental professional to make sure we are on track.
Thank you, Sarah Lou. Yeah, I'm Carrie Racky. I'm with Stantec Environmental Consulting. I'm based in Portland, and I'm in Beaverton. And I'll be helping out with, as Sarah Lou and Monica said, figuring out kind of the eligibility piece, which sites are eligible to come into the program, and then the technical pieces of doing the environmental assessment and cleanup work and the revitalization planning that can also be done with this grant funding that we'll talk about today. Is this a good place for you to start, Sarah Lou? Or you want me to start?
Yep, she's muted.
Yeah, you're gonna take it until about midway. So
Okay, yeah, I'll kick it off then. So a little overview of what we're gonna go over today. We've done our welcome and our introductions. We're gonna start off with what I always call a Brownfield 101. I think it's really important to just kind of lay the foundation of understanding all the terminology that we're gonna be using and kind of the background of the program and what it could look like in Clatsop County. And then we'll move on to getting a little more specific about the Clatsop County grant, what exactly it can cover, and what the goals are that are expressed in the grant application. And we'll talk about what the community's role is in the grant process. Their EPA, it's public funding, so it's really important to EPA that the community has a role and is kept informed as the grant project moves forward. And then we'll have a period for questions and discussion and a mapping exercise where we can talk about potential sites that are on your mind. So kicking off the Brownfields 101, this is EPA's definition of a brownfield. It's property where the expansion or redevelopment or reuse is complicated by the presence or suspected presence of contamination. So what does that mean kind of in the real world? We think, Sarah Lou mentioned gas stations, or I think it was Monica mentioned gas stations and dry cleaners. Those are the
Oh no, Carrie, you are breaking up really bad
first, because dry cleaning solvents and sorry.
You're doing better now.
I'm going to hide my camera. I'm going to turn my camera off and see if maybe that helps with bandwidth.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So as I was saying that gas stations and dry cleaners are the types of sites that people think of first. They know that there are big tanks of gasoline in the ground and that dry cleaners use solvents that can leak and cause problems. But so some of them are obvious, but others are not. I think in Oregon, we have urban growth boundaries, and we're encouraged to basically do land recycling, to not sprawl beyond the core development areas. So brownfields might look a little different here than, say, in the Rust Belt in Detroit or in, the suburbs of Chicago. So they can be big box stores that are empty. They're not living up to their potential. You don't know what was there 30 years ago. It could be a big empty field that has some kind of vague, indications that there was something there in the past. If you look at this bottom image, there's sort of an auto repair facility, and then to the side of it, there's this vacant area that has some fencing around it and some concrete pad. So what was there before? And it's a residential neighborhood and it's kind of a busy street. So it's an opportunity for infill development if you understand what the condition of the property is and what it's suitable to be next. So these are some things to think about when you're looking at a piece of property. Is it a brownfield? Is there contamination that's known or suspected? And, suspected can just mean you don't know what used to be there, or there's a building that has been vandalized and has, graffiti and maybe some dumping. Is it underutilized? Is it a small building that just has one or two jobs and it's on a big piece of property that has a lot of potential to have some other uses on it? Is it an unsuitable use? Is it a an industrial type facility really close to a residential neighborhood. It could be something as simple as, is it for sale or for lease? Because when properties change hands, there's the opportunity to check on the environmental condition of that property and make sure that its next use is safe and fits into the community's goals. And is there a revitalization plan for the site or for the area? Those are the kinds of sites you want to kind of prioritize within this grant program. What are some of the impacts of brownfields? Why do we care? Why do we try to avoid letting brownfields sit around? Well, I mentioned urban growth boundaries, so it's land recycling, it's infill development, it prevents sprawl. It's also that sort of crime and dumping and vandalism kind of beget more crime and dumping and vandalism. So keeping properties developed and lots of activity and eyes on them helps minimize those problems. There's a big economic benefit in terms of the tax base, creation of jobs, improving property values. Of course, there's public health and environmental health. And then there's just the concept of livability, making a community a pleasant place to be and to attract people to come and visit and to move to a community. And another aspect that is really important to EPA right now that they talk about a lot is environmental justice. And so I just thought we'd, kind of define some of the terminology here while we have the opportunity. And environmental justice is really just the concept that every community has the right to, be healthy and be free from exposure to contaminants and pollution. And that it acknowledges that there has been a bit of a history of citing industrial facilities or landfills or highways near communities that have been underrepresented and haven't really had the voice or the power to influence that process. So, in Clatsop County, you can, through the public involvement process, we'll kind of figure out what that means to you in Clatsop County, making sure that, lower income communities have a place at the table and that sort of thing. And this is all sort of part of what's called the Justice 40 initiative. That is one of President Biden's initiatives. And the 40 refers to a goal that 40% of the benefits that come out of any federally funded program like this one go to underserved communities. So a little bit of history about these grants, this type of grant that you have that's been going since the 90s. It's a really successful and highly supported, it's a bipartisan supported program. Every year there's an annual competition where communities submit a pretty hefty grant application. And there are several different types of grants you can go for, as Sarah Lou was mentioning. There's assessment grants, which is for sort of sampling properties to see kind of what the problems are there. There are cleanup grants, and those are they can be site specific or they can be community wide. And there are the revolving loan fund type grants that EPA gives to a community, and then the community can make loans for cleanup work. It's a very competitive program. Lately, it's gotten a little less competitive because there's a lot of money being pumped into the program from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. So that's a good thing. There's lots more money floating around. I think EPA had to kind of get up to speed with staffing. And so what they did was, instead of giving more grants out last time, they gave bigger grants out. But I think they're staffing up, so we can look forward to more of these awards in communities all around the country. So these are kind of an overview of the types of grants I just mentioned. They do kind of split them up. Some are for assessment, some are for cleanup. There are multi-purpose grants that are for both. Those get kind of complicated in terms of who has to own the property. And then, so those are available at the federal level and at the state level too, assessment and cleanup grants, but we're kind of just focusing on the EPA federal grant program now. So what can you do with an assessment grant? So this is the type of grant that Clatsop County has. It's called a community-wide assessment grant. And that means that the money can be spent. It's not specific to a certain property. It can be spent on properties that the community identifies as high priorities. And the bulk of the funding is intended to be spent on environmental assessments. So going in, taking samples, and evaluating whether if it was an old gas station, are the tanks gone, did they leak, that kind of thing. You can also identify and prioritize brownfields. So you can kind of make an effort to kind of go through and do a visual survey, see what properties look like they're underutilized, look at DEQ records. So you can do some research and develop some priorities that way. It's really important to EPA that as part of these grants, we do community engagement. So this is an example of that. And there will be several different types of engagement throughout the life of the grant. And it's important to note that with this particular grant, costs for cleanup, if cleanup is necessary, those costs are not eligible to be covered by this particular grant, but there are funds available at both the state and federal level to do that cleanup if it's necessary. What are some of the goals of EPA when they give these grants to communities? Well, it's not just about contamination. In fact, I often tell communities it's as much about livability and economic development as it is about contamination, especially in Oregon, where we don't have the really long history. If you go to the northeast of this country, you'll see brownfields that are 200 years old and where they used to make, Civil War uniforms. Not even my sister lives in Connecticut, and I can't believe some of the properties that are just vacant on rivers with broken windows, and they're 300 years old. It's amazing. But in Oregon, it can be a lot more about livability and economic development. So some of the goals that I'm sure you're kind of getting the picture here are to address constraints to redeveloping a property. So if there is a property out here and it's not being redeveloped, why is that? Is it just perception? Can we do a fairly straightforward environmental assessment and clear up some of the question marks about what's going on at this property? Of course, economic development, developing housing, affordable housing is a huge need in Clatsop County and frankly, all around the state and the country. Improve livability, develop parks, create amenities so that it's a pleasant place to be and live, get the community involved in revitalizing neighborhoods and sites, and creating jobs, which again is kind of part of economic development. So kind of the aspiration of what can happen with these brownfield grants. This top set of pictures is the Junkie Delta Center in Portland, and pretty obvious it was a gas station, that picture on the left, and now it's a community center. It's a LEED certified building, and it's in a historically underserved neighborhood. So a huge success story, even though it's a pretty small site, and they were able to just make a huge difference in what it looked like and how it functions. And then this bottom picture is a site I worked on in Salem. It was an ice cream factory. And you can see in the foreground there had been an underground storage tank that had been removed, but we were able to do some assessment work and some reuse planning. And now it's a daycare, much needed kind of family services center in Salem. So these are the kinds of things we're hoping to see. It's economic development, it's livability, it's getting rid of blight. And, EPA has done studies on what are the impacts of this. We're getting a little old. I bet that these numbers are even bigger now, but they've found that for every dollar that the EPA has invested through the Brownfield Grant Program, leverages nearly $18 of additional investment. So that's another thing too, $500,000 for this grant. You're not going to change the face of a city or a county with $500,000. It's intended to be seed money and to leverage additional public and private investment. And with that, I will turn it over to Sarah Lou for a bit.
Great. Thank you, Carrie. If you'll go to the next slide, I just want to talk about some of the specifics around this grant opportunity and also explain a little bit on how it works. So out of the total award, there's about $450,000 in grants available to do assessments, characterizations, and reuse planning. And so I have the pleasure of knowing many of you. And so I can imagine you're wondering if this is cash up front or reimbursement. And the answer is neither. This is a situation where you can nominate a site. Carrie and I work to ensure that it is eligible for all of EPA's programming, and then we would help get that work done. And what you end up with is we have funding for phase 1 assessments, and I like to think of those as from the desk assessments. It's historical research, it's looking at old maps, it's determining if you need a phase 2 assessment, which would require sampling this characterization of if it is contaminated, what type of contaminants might it be. And then one of the things that I think is really exciting is the possibility to use some of these funds for reuse planning. There's some larger properties and organizations in the county that have access to some vital lands. And if they're interested in the programming, we have the opportunity to look at reuse planning, like if a schematic would help put a property back into use by selling it, or other opportunities for economic development on those parcels. So it's a partnership all along the way. And what you get, you know, are those assessments, either a phase 1 or a phase 2, or the possibility to look at some reuse planning. As it was mentioned earlier, this is a 4-year project that we started last year by creating a detailed work plan. And so you just want to kind of think about that timeline as you're looking at projects that you might be interested in. There are shelf lives of these assessments, so you'll also want to consider that when you're contemplating when you are ready to engage. So those are the basics of the grant that we have here for Clatsop County. And just wanted to reiterate something that Monica said earlier. We did choose several sites in some brainstorming sessions just for illustrative purposes. And what they have in common is that they can be used for housing units and employment opportunities, as well as community amenities, public amenities. And so those are kind of really the reuses that we're focusing these assistance dollars on. There is a scoring process that allows everybody a fair chance and takes these into consideration. And so those are the priorities. And as we talk about different properties, they'll have different opportunities. So I think next slide. And these are kind of the things that we have gone over. It is site identification and selection, environmental assessments, both phase 1 and phase 2, cleanup and reuse planning, and of course, in community engagement, especially around that reuse planning and outreach to folks that might be able to take advantage of this program. So I'll turn it over to Carrie to talk about the identification process.
Sure. Okay. So one way to kind of, you know, Clatsop County is large, and it's good to have sort of an automated way to identify some properties that might be good candidates for some assessment work or some reuse planning. So we have GIS tools that we can use to identify properties. We look at we kind of do a series of like nets with smaller and smaller holes. So we start out with looking at all the properties in the county, and then we say, okay, which one of these have environmental records with DEQ or EPA? And then, as Sarah Lou mentioned earlier, we look at things like historical maps, like Sanborn fire insurance maps that show what in more urbanized areas over the past century. And we look at aerial photos, we look at city directories, and then we'll do a visual survey, just kind of looking at properties with our eyes to see, you know, as I described earlier, is there dumping there? Is there vandalism? Are there drums of something we don't know what it is sitting in the back 40? So kind of just, you know, using your eyes and seeing if there might be some issues there that would need to be, again, it's looking at constraints to redevelopment. So looking at it in a way of how can we get rid of things that are going on there that are preventing this property from realizing its highest and best use. And then, as Sarah Lou mentioned, there's a prioritization sort of a system, and it's flexible, but you know, we know which properties, typically properties that are larger, for example, have often a higher redevelopment potential, or properties, we look at what's called the improvement to land value ratio, and that's when you look at what's the value of the development on a piece of land compared to the value of the land itself. And if the land is significantly more valuable than what's on it, then that just demonstrates a potential underutilization. There's potential to do better for that site to kind of have a higher and better use. So those are the kinds of characteristics that we'll look for to help identify which properties might be. So just to kind of restate, you know, what these assessments are, there's a phase 1 environmental site assessment, and you may be familiar with these. These are often required by lenders when there's a property transaction. So if someone wants to buy a brownfield and start investing in its renewal, if they are seeking funding from a lender, they will often be required to do a phase 1 environmental site assessment. And it's always a good idea to do a phase 1 environmental site assessment. They're not a very expensive type of assessment, but they provide some liability protection, and they tell you what you're buying. You know, you get a qualified environmental professional doing one of these studies, and then you understand, you know, have a good understanding of what the risks are of buying a piece of property. So as Sarah Lou mentioned, we call them a desktop study. There is no sampling in a phase 1. It's really just looking at historical information, taking a look at the site visually, and writing up a report that says, okay, here's what we see that might be an issue. And we would recommend that you might want to do some sampling to evaluate these issues. Or sometimes we say, we didn't find anything at all. We don't see that there's a potential issue for the site, and we don't even recommend doing any further assessment. It looks like it's good to go. So if we do recommend that phase 2 environmental site assessment, that's when the sampling comes in. And so phase 1 environmental site assessments, they kind of all follow the exact same process. They don't look the same because no site is like every other site, right? The findings will be different, but it's a very prescriptive process that we have to follow to do a phase 1. But a phase 2, they all look different, and it can be, you know, a $20,000, $100,000 if there's a very complex site. So there's a lot of variability there. But the phase 1 gives you really good guidance on what contaminants do I want to look for? Where do I want to look for them? Where on the site, and in what media, in the soil or in the groundwater, in the soil vapor, all of the above. So what we do is a work plan prior to doing a phase 2 that the EPA approves before we go out and start collecting these samples. So everyone's on the same page that we're going to get the right questions answered. And these phase 2 environmental site assessments can include sampling for building materials like asbestos and lead paint. So that can be huge if, you know, there's plans to demolish or renovate a building. That can come in really handy to have these assessments done. And then you have this report that can be handed to an abatement contractor, and they can give you a bid for the abatement work. And as I mentioned earlier, for the right projects, there's money available to help cover abatement work and cleanup work in general. So cleanup planning, this is a really cool and kind of exciting piece of these grants that EPA gives out. You can do, they're very, very flexible. So you can do cleanup planning, which is literally if there's contamination there, does it need to be cleaned up? You can take it all the way. You can get bids from contractors. You can do a work plan. You can take it all the way up to where you're actually digging in the ground and taking out the contamination, or going into the building and abating asbestos and lead paint. So everything up to what we call implementation of the cleanup. So writing the plans, getting the bidders all lined up, and then you're all ready to go to, say, Business Oregon and say, we need to do some cleanup work and we've done all of our homework and this is how much it's going to cost. And so it's kind of a nice transition piece. And that's a little different from this other type of planning you can do with the grant funding, which is reuse planning. So this can be site specific. This can be applied to a focus area, which could be, a neighborhood or an intersection that maybe is underperforming, or a corridor. But these are really flexible. You can do almost anything that you can tell EPA, we need this type of study in order to revitalize this brownfield impacted area. You'll probably get a yes. So you can look at market studies, so market feasibility studies. So you have a piece of property and someone's thinking they want to put, a coffee shop on this piece of property. You could do a market feasibility study to see, is that a good spot for that? Do you need that there? Is there, is this something that the community wants? Are there 3 within, 2 blocks already? More complex than that, but just to give you an idea. Or, those market studies, they can be general, they can be community-wide, they can be county-wide, to kind of see what are people leaving Clatsop County in order to do? What are the needs that could be met within the county? And how can brownfield revitalization help meet those needs? It can be things like infrastructure evaluation. So I worked for example, in Klamath Falls, and they have really old water systems there, and they're not, large enough to handle modern fire requirements for sprinkler systems. So we kind of looked into what their infrastructure needs were to get this particular part of town revitalized. They had this big hole in their infrastructure, and you can look for things like what funding is available to deal with problems like that. That's all part of reuse planning. You can do HUD reviews for affordable housing projects. So kind of looking at things like noise and explosion risks and wetlands and all those things that you have to kind of clear up if you're going to get federal money to move forward with housing development projects. And then we can do things as simple as conceptual drawings and plans, and those can come in really handy for things like community engagement, and talking with funders, talking with anyone who you're trying to get funding from for a project, and saying, this is what it could look like. We've talked to the community, this meets their needs and goals, and it gets them excited. It really is kind of I work with a planner who does this work. I'm not a planner. I joke that I'm the dirty dirt and dirty water person. I do the environmental work. And nobody gets really excited about my phase 1s and 2s. They're not really exciting to talk about, but this stuff, the reuse planning, it gets everybody engaged and excited. So it's a really helpful tool. And I put a website here at the bottom where you can go, and EPA actually put a list of examples of eligible planning activities. And it's a good kind of place to go and look, because they have a fact sheet for each, and there's like 8 different things, and it's not limited to those things, but it shows the breadth of what you can do. So Sarah Lou had mentioned a little bit about the process. I'll just briefly kind of restate it. So how does this work? So a site is identified by the county, by the community, or by an individual. And how does that happen? Well, it can be nominated. So there's a site nomination form that's going to be, I think it already is, on the county's Brownfield webpage. And it's a fillable form that anyone can fill out and send in to the county, to say, you know, this is either my property that I think could use some assistance, or this is a property I drive by on my way to work every day that I think maybe could use some attention. So the city will become, or the county will become aware of it through that process, or through the kind of the GIS process that I described earlier. And then, so once the county becomes aware of the site and the interest, they'll kind of internally vet it to make sure that it sort of meets the definition of a brownfield and passes the very low threshold at first, but then, you know, reach out to the property owner to talk to them about what the program is and their, you know, potential for interest in the site. And, you know, once we have a list of sites that that come sort of to the top, we're doing that sort of GIS assessment, we'll evaluate those nominated sites and evaluate sites that come sort of through that organic identification process for their eligibility, as well as, you know, someone can be interested, but there could be circumstances that mean the site's not eligible. So there is an eligibility process that we'll have to go through with each site. And then the county will talk with stakeholders and the property owner about what the grant can do and what's needed at the site. If everybody's on board, once everybody kind of has all of the information, then the county will talk to them about what they need. Do they need a phase one? You don't have to go in sort of a specific order. You don't have to do a phase one and then you do a phase two and then you do cleanup planning. If you already have a phase one in hand and you and it's been done properly, then there's the potential you could start with your phase two. Or if you already have both, then everything's kind of squared away. You can potentially move right to cleanup planning or to reuse planning. So that's a conversation that would happen with the property owner once everybody's on board. And then the work would be performed, the phase ones and the phase twos and the cleanup planning and the reuse planning would be performed by Stantec using the grant funds and paid directly by the county. So it's not a sub-grant type program where property owners would get a grant from the county. It would just be the county covers the approved costs. So what are the goals of the community engagement piece of this? And Sarah Lou, did you want to jump in on the community engagement piece? I think you were gonna.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think we're getting to the place where we might be pulling up a map and hearing from folks here on the call. So the EPA, you know, really wants the community to be involved in this. These are federal funds. We want you to be well informed. And just to reiterate, property owners are the only people that decide whether or not they want to be in this program. It's totally voluntary. We will do outreach to them to make sure that they are aware that this is available here in our community. But you know, with this engagement that we're doing tonight, we want to lean on your local area knowledge and your historical knowledge of what's been going on in your community, and tell us what your priorities are for, you know, is it housing, is it job creation? We really want to know what outcomes you would like to see through this process as well. So what we're going to do is, Carrie, if you will stop the share screen real quick, I am going to pull up a map and it will have pins that just show some sites that have been identified by folks in the application process. And so we'll just open it up for Q&A. And we can also, I'm thinking that there's some people on the call that maybe have some properties that they would like to show up on this this potential properties list. So go ahead, raise your hand or just jump on in if you've got a question about something we've said tonight or want to share ideas with us. Go ahead, Chester.
Let me unmute there. Thank you. Well, first off, I mean, great information. I appreciate that. Obviously, it leads to a number of questions. All I hope ones that you'd expect to get at this stage. But myself, I'm working on a property near the Portway Tavern. In fact, it's the name of the project is called the Portway Station, and it involves property from Marine Drive down to Industry Street and then over to roughly where the England Marine is, but it falls slightly short of that. All of that has been environmentally tainted, and I think there's about 4 different organizations that have been involved in getting the cleanup from the Port of Astoria through Nemi Oil, et cetera. And where we are is the cleanups have largely been completed, but we have a proposed remediation and contaminated media management plan that's in the process with DEQ, although I would say it's also at the very, very end of the process. How does something like this apply, where what we're looking at is something like a what's been proposed by us, and DEQ seems to be in agreement, is like a vacuum extraction system with a underneath 2/3 of the property, and merely the infrastructure there. But we don't really have. We'd love to have a common agreement that yes, that would get the job done, and no, you don't have to actually fire up the extraction system. And so there's some additional planning that has to go on there. And my second part of the question, especially given where we are, and we've had discussions in the past, been fairly well communicated, even in the press, that we are interested in urban renewal funds that are available for that site. And the question becomes, how does this potentially layer with things like urban renewal funds? What does the capital stack have to look like to kind of move it up the prioritization scheme? And that's it for the first set of questions.
Well, I can jump in on that technical first piece of the question about sort of your cleanup system. So I'd be curious to learn more specifics about where you are in the process. It sounds like you have a general idea of a cleanup plan, but there's still maybe some negotiation to do with DEQ.
Well, we have multiple sites with multiple cleanup plans that are in various stages of completion, but mostly toward the tail end, as long as we engage in a vacuum extraction system that's comprehensive throughout the multiple property owners. So we've got a couple of purchase and sale agreements that still have to be completed, but many of these are, I should say, the biggest one is pending the outcome of the DEQ final draft being, actually going public. So I don't know whether, Sarah Lou, you can point out what we're really talking about here in terms of the area. I don't believe I have the ability with a pointer, but essentially it's, I think, all told. Yeah, what's that? It's starting at Portway.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go, right there where your pointer is, heading down Portway Street. And that whole area, from that whole area to the north of Marine Drive, all the way down past Dutch Bros, is down below. That whole area right in there. There you go. It's about 1.5 to 2 acres total, and we have 3 different environmental companies working on, the potential outcomes that have been kind of working together on these things. But I'm not really overly concerned about that. But in terms of being able to tie a bow on what it is that we have to do environmentally to be able to move forward toward a building permit, I suspect there's some additional planning. We've got a phase 1, we've got geotech done, we've been through historic landmarks, we've been through community design. So we've done all of that. In fact, we're up against extensions now at this point in time. But I'd love to know where you see, given that where we are on these various things, this type of a grant can apply. And of course, I'm also interested, again, like I said, about how that might fit with other things that we're asking for. If it kicks us out of being eligible because, say, for instance, we may be eligible for urban renewal funds, or if it's actually a better scenario because we're layering together all sorts of public funds to actually make this happen. One other thing that you talked about that was very interesting, and that's specific to this site, are things that aren't necessarily environmental, but they cause difficulty and challenges for any normal development to take place. And I kind of call it, what does it take to level the playing field? Otherwise, if it wasn't for that, this thing would have been developed a long time ago. They have views of the views of the river, close proximity to the river walk, close proximity to town, on level land, et cetera. And one of them is that there's a couple of very challenging and aging, decrepit retaining walls. And so we've been out to the various people that would, engineers that would give us some swags on those, and it could be anywhere from $50 to $150 to $200,000 to build those retaining walls back to the point where they would support the type of project that we're talking about. Which, by the way, for those of you that don't know, this is a proposed 72-unit apartment complex built in 12-unit pods made of shipping containers that you wouldn't recognize as shipping containers by the time you saw the architectural plan. We've been working with the architect that put the development together at Seabrook up in Washington, if you're familiar with that one. So we've got a really exciting plan to pull together, but again, it does have its challenges. And when I got a call from Mr. Brownson this morning to say you might want to, or an email, you might want to participate in this, I was happy to see it, because I think this is going to be a lot of oars in the water to get this particular project pulled off. Over.
Yeah, I mean, I
think
think go ahead.
No, Carrie, please.
I mean, I was just going to say, I think it would be worth kind of, having a chat offline, because it sounds like there's a lot of moving pieces. I think the planning piece of this grant might be helpful to you, depending on what you already have and what gaps you might have in sort of the planning. And then part of the planning is looking for funding for, things like rebuilding retaining walls. And so, we could talk about, I mean, you might have already done a lot of digging, and it'd be good to know what you know about all of that. But, if it can be characterized in a certain way, there are, maybe funds available from Business Oregon's Brownfield program that might be able to help with those kinds of things. So yeah, I think it sounds like a complex site, and maybe something I can dig into a little bit and get a better understanding if we want to, have a deeper chat about it.
That'd be great. I don't want to hog the call, there's others on the call, but I appreciate the information that you provided today, and I'm eager to dig into what the possibilities might be.
And Chester, could you just drop your email into the chat so I can follow up with you?
Sure, happy to.
Thanks. Or actually, I can put mine in the email in the chat for everybody, and so it can go both ways.
And I'll touch on some of that at the end too, Sarah Lou, in regards to contact information.
Awesome. Pastor Bill, were you looking at raising your hand?
No, not specifically, but now that you have recognized me, Sarah, thank you. I would just like to put on your radar and assure you that we would like to fill out an eligibility application for an old boarding house that we are attempting to reclaim for affordable housing, that's located at 1163 through 1169 Marine Drive. It's the 4-story pink building that used to house the alternative on the street level as a retail, when Antique Hardware and the Sears Home Store were formerly directly across the street. The members of First Presbyterian Church purchased this building and the adjoining vacant parking lot that is just to its east, not to its west, just to its east, that has the exact same footprint. And we have a memorandum of understanding today with Innovative Housing Inc., a nonprofit developer from Portland, aptly represented by Julie Garver. And we have begun the phase 1 assessment process. And so would certainly love to determine whether or not this property is eligible. We don't have any specific concerns yet, well formulated about what, if any, hazards there are. But you know, it used to have a boiler, and though we have certification that the tanks were decommissioned, you know, there was no lender involved with the purchase of this property, so we were not required at closing to have a phase 1 assessment. The members are paying cash, so over 5 years. So we're now doing the phase 1 assessment as is appropriate, and we would love to apply and see if our property too can be eligible for your consideration.
Excellent. Well, I've got you here.
Thank you.
Did anybody? Yeah, of course. Did anybody else have a question about the program or a property that they wanted us to be aware of? And this could be countywide. I know our first 2 have been in Astoria, but this is anywhere in Clatsop County.
Sure. Tom Brownson.
Hey, Tom, hit me.
Okay, so I just have probably some more general questions. Again, I see some properties that you have pointed out, and so out Tongue Point Way, what are you looking at specifically out there? Is that just a general area that you're saying there's possibilities out there, sort of a thing?
Yeah, there are different property owners that could have different issues, and so we just want to outreach to them to let them know about the program.
Right, okay, and over on Youngs Bay, were you also looking at the PP&L's old power station? There's some contaminated grounds out there, so it's undevelopable. I'm not sure if that would be the sort of candidate, and I'm not even sure how you know, whether it's PP&L's ever interested in cleaning it up or just sitting on it. But that would be an example of, say, I wanted to nominate something. I say, well, how about this property out here? It's not mine. I have a vested interest as a city councilor. But if I make a nomination, then you would reach out to property owners and other interested parties to see if there's something there or a will to go forward, right? Something like that.
Exactly. We would reach out to them to say, do you know that this program is available? We understand that there might be an opportunity for you to benefit from it, but it's definitely
Right.
the owner's decision.
Right. And private property and public property all is eligible.
I am
So
relatively,
if
but I'm going to
Go
defer
ahead.
that to Carrie.
Yes,
So for-
public property is eligible, and private, it's the only thing that would make it ineligible is if Clatsop County had caused the contamination or owned the property when it became contaminated, as the grantee.
Okay, so one of the examples that come to mind is the old Darigold building property. which the city has expressed interest in taking over from the county in hopes of putting housing there. Now, it's been sitting there for a long time. It's not the county just kind of took it over by default or whatever. So it would be an eligible property. It would be based on the business that was there as a Duragold Farm Supply, something like that. So that would be an eligible property.
I
and
have
as-
to look into details, but
Well, potentially.
it's there's this rule with EPA about sites that are contaminated with petroleum. Am I breaking up? Are you hearing me okay?
Yes, hearing you fine. I hear you fine.
Okay, I think there's a little delay. Okay. Yeah, I can look into the eligibility for you for sure. And one thing that I just, when you mentioned the city potentially taking that property, I always like to, this is like my drum that I beat endlessly. And if you're on other calls with me, you'll hear me say it, but always get a phase 1 ESA. Always get a phase 1 ESA before taking ownership, especially as a public agency, because if you don't, I mean, there's the liability concerns, but I think what's more important is if you want to get future funding from either the federal government or some of the funding that Business Oregon has to help with brownfield work comes from the federal government. So it comes with the same strings. And one of the strings that the federal government has is you can't use funds, you can't get a grant there if you didn't do a phase 1. So it's, $5,000-ish typically to do a phase 1. It's a good investment. Just anytime the city or county or any, this program is ideal for that. So that's my plug.
And Tom, I
Hey,
took those sites down in the notes, so we'll add them.
okay, great. And just again, along the same line, so I know the Port of Astoria has dealt with a lot of contaminated areas, and that's what some of what Chester's dealing with is some of the mitigation that's gone on or is in process of happening by the port. So if the port had other areas of concern, again, they could come to you as well. Is that correct? And are they aware of this program at all? Has anybody reached out to them?
Yes, I've actually had a long conversation with Matt McGrath
Okay,
for the week before. So they're aware and interested, which is great news.
good.
I was going to say, I think I see Commissioner Webb's hand is raised unless you had another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I just lowered my hand because I realized that I have so many questions that I probably need to sit down and meet with you, Sarah Lou, and talk a little bit more about the process as it's going forward. But this has been very helpful. Thank you very much. This is a lot of wonderful information in here, and I hope we can get it. I hope we can get it out, push it out into the community as much as possible. Thank you.
Absolutely. If there aren't any other questions, I'll turn it over to Monica.
I think Chester has one. Chester has another question.
General question, move it out into Pam's area, out into the county here. Take a piece of property like Nygaard's behind the Shiloh, up along the dike. 9 acres of wetlands. You mentioned that it doesn't necessarily need to be a contaminated site. It could be used for economic development if the criteria were that the property is challenged for a number of reasons, and certainly 9 acres of wetlands, of which I shouldn't say that. It's 9 acres of which 4 or 5 acres, nothing contiguous, is wetlands. But we've had conversations in the past about potentially trying to develop something along the dike. And would this be something that from a pre-planning standpoint, we could count on to at least nominate it for eligibility? Or is the fact that it's absent of any actual contamination preclude it from being considered? I just want to make sure I was clear on what the demarcation points were.
Yeah, and I can speak to that in that. So if it's greenfield, I mean, the spirit of the grant is that it's property that has been previously developed. But there are circumstances where, you know, it might not have been previously developed, but maybe there was agricultural use there and pesticides were used and you don't know. Or maybe there's a property adjacent or upgradient that could have released contaminants that could have impacted the site that hasn't it in itself maybe had. So it's a little bit hairier when you have a property that, you know, that maybe has always been greenfield, but it's not out of the question. So that's definitely something that we'd want to kind of do a case by case look.
I think I caught
You're starting to break up a little bit again, Carrie.
we got the gist of it from you, but thank you.
Yeah, let's chat offline. I'm so sorry about my connection.
All right.
It's
That's all
nothing personal. We won't hold it against you, Carrie.
Thank you.
And I have just one more general question as well. You said at the beginning that this is a 4-year project. In terms of process, what does that mean? Does that mean it ends in 4 years? It's going to take me 4 years to get the grant. I mean, what does that mean?
A little bit of everything. I think what it means practically is we're starting our outreach and we're doing our research, and there will probably be people that start in year 1, in year 2. What we have to do is make sure that funds are expended by our deadline in 2026. That being said,
Okay.
I think that the hope for this is to be a starting point to continue this work, to build out programs, to bring in more research, more resources. Like Carrie said, $500,000 will get the ball rolling. But in the scheme of some of these things, we hope that there's more to come if this goes well.
Right. Okay.
And there are communities that I've worked with who, you know, basically build a brownfield program using these funds. Like City of Portland has, they have staff who are partially funded through their EPA Brownfield grant. So, you know, I've worked with communities to develop sort of a waiting list of properties if you expend all of your funds and you haven't gotten to everyone. And that's a really great place to start with writing another grant application, with saying we have people on a list waiting. As long as you've spent 70% of your existing grant, you can apply for another one.
Yeah, so a lot of this is on a case-by-case basis. Every site is
End of 2026.
so it'll be a little bit of a rolling process, and this is our first kickoff push for it. So
are there any other questions or comments? So if not, I just want to kind of follow up with next steps in regards to how you all can stay informed and how you all can also share this information with others who you might think have properties that would benefit from this program. But I want to start also by saying, you know, we've been talking about brownfields, and I think one thing that we also need to look at this is from the perspective of, while they're called brownfield sites, they're really opportunity sites because they have a lot of opportunity to better our community from both a housing, economic development, just a lot of opportunities, livability, and so forth. And so, how you can stay informed is we have this information posted on our website, and there is a specific section that talks about brownfields. It's a special project, and it's highlighted on there. You can go to that website, and that is where we will be posting things such as the recordings for this meeting tonight. So if you weren't able to join us from the beginning and you want to go back and hear what was discussed, you will be able to go to the recorded meetings. It's our intention when we have these meetings as much as possible that we do provide them in both virtual and in-person opportunities. So that way we can have these posted to our site. You will also be able to access the presentation. So if you don't want to listen to the whole meeting, but you want to look at the slides again, we will also have those posted there. You can go to the website now and we have the nomination forms posted there. And so you can go ahead and start filling those out. It should be a fillable PDF. You will have to print it off and mail it into us. But there's the opportunity to email that or mail it in. There will be the contact information. So myself, Sarah Lou, Carrie. So if you weren't able to get any of our contact information through the chat this evening, you can go to the website and access our information there. And we will continue as we go through this process, we will continue to update the website with information in regards to those sites that have met the eligibility criteria and we are starting project work on. And it is our intention as we go through this process with these properties that we are able to take some of them and have those before and after pictures like Carrie had posted on previous projects. And so we want to really get the word out about this. And so we encourage you all to share this information with those in the community that you know. Like Sarah Lou said, this is a county-wide grant. And so while there has been a lot of conversation about Astoria properties, we know that there are sites that have been identified in the city of Warrenton, down in the south part of the county. Economic development and housing is needed everywhere throughout Clatsop County. And so we just want to provide these opportunities throughout. And so with that, I'm going to ask one more time if there are any questions or comments before we wrap things up for this evening, or if Sarah Lou or Carrie want to add anything prior to us leaving.
Thank you from this camp. Thank you.
Great.
I'll just say I appreciate you all coming tonight. I know this is a new program to the county and it's been an off-kilter day. So I'm glad you found us here online and just looking forward to talking to you about all the great things that y'all have cooking.
Yes, I'm thankful for you all being flexible in regards to shifting to all virtual today. So we are glad you were able to make it.
Yeah, and thank you for the information and good to see both of you, Sarah Lou and Monica. Long time no see.
Yeah.
We've been precluded from face to face for a lot of reasons, but I miss seeing you both and cherish the contributions that you make to the community.
Well, thank you. We appreciate all that all of you are working to do as well. So best
And good to meet you, Carrie.
Best wishes for the rest of your evening. And again, check out our website. So thank you so much.
All right, let's go.
Okay, thank you. Good to see you all.